Aeon is an organization that's been around for about 26 years in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and we have about 2,000 units of affordable housing today. Our vision is quite simple when you read it, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. Every person has a home and is interconnected within community. So there's a couple of important words in there. One is home, more than four walls and a roof, like y'all know and work towards in this room. And we've gone so far to say, are we really creating home for people? Are we really creating a space where people can succeed, and how do you measure home? So a couple of years ago, we hired some smart people who know how to do surveys, and ended up talking to a lot of residents over and over again, what makes home for you, and do you have home here? And what we really boiled it down to were three things. One is safety and security. Not only their physical safety, but they feel comfortable in their environment. The other one is ownership. Even though we do multifamily rental, there is a sense that you have control over your space. And the third is engagement, that you engage on a regular basis with a certain number of people in your community so you feel connected. So we measure that every year to see if we're creating home, and are able to tell at each of our properties which ones are doing better, so we can look at why they aren't. And then the interconnected within community is another piece. So it's really more about getting people more connected with each other, and it creates a better place for people. Our journey on sustainability really started, maybe around 10 years ago. We were doing a bunch of things, and we're known as leaders in the community, and kind of tried this and tried that, and some of it worked and some of it didn't. Some we weren't really sure of, and along the way, some people were, that doesn't work. Green and sustainability, those words started to get sort of meaningless. So when we talked about it within the organization to CFOs and other folks who are number crunchers, we really talked about it as conservation, high performance building, sound business principles, and that seems to resonate with more people. Really wanted to integrate the three pieces of really that financial piece. How can we as a nonprofit organization not create buildings for 15 or 20 years, but how are they 100-year assets? Looking at the effect on the environment around it. And then that social piece was really critical to our work. So after we kind of tripped and did some good things and had some successes, and we decided we need to be really more intentional about this. And there's three types of buildings that we usually work on. Something brand new construction, substantial rehab. We might buy an old warehouse and convert it into housing. This case was actually a historic preservation on top of that. And then the third was moderate rehab. So either our own buildings or buildings we're acquiring where people are already living in it. So we knew we weren't smart enough to do it on our own, even though I think we do a pretty good job. We partnered with the Center for Sustainable Building Research out of the University of Minnesota, and they've been a really great partner of ours ever since, and got us to advance ourselves forward. So the building on the left here is the Alliance Apartments in Minneapolis, and it received a LEED for Homes Platinum for their mid-rise pilot. So that was finished in 2010. It's home for folks who are formerly homeless and battling chemical addiction towards sobriety. The middle building is a historic on the National Register of Historic Places in St. Paul called the Renaissance Box, and it will receive its LEED Platinum or LEED Gold certification. And then the third, we didn't go for a certification, but it's a property in a suburb, first-ring suburb called Roseville, and it has a lot of improved energy, water, etc., saving features in it. So we were really excited about those, but we realized it wasn't quite hitting the benchmarks we wanted. We did some great things, and some of it was incremental change. The other thing we realized over the next 20 years, if we continue to conservatively produce and acquire properties, and thinking that energy costs and water costs are only going to rise by 2%, Ann and our residents will spend over $100 million in that 20-year period. So we recognize that as a real resource that we need to start figuring out. So as much as LEED helped propel us forward, we started thinking about other programs, and we started to think about creating our own. And then I stumbled upon the Living Building Challenge, a much more holistic, performance-based sustainability program out there. So for some reason we said, let's go for it. So thankfully with the University of Minnesota's help, and are some of you familiar with it? Anyone familiar? So I don't have to say much more. It's out of the Cascadia region on the West Coast. Extremely aggressive. It's net zero energy, net zero water, really tight kind of material use, many restrictions, but then also holistic around, you know, how you treat the site, equity, beauty, and what was that? Yes, something. So let me go back. Site, water, energy, materials, equity, beauty, and then I said the other one last time. Yeah. So it's a very aggressive program, and we wanted to. The phrase that really inspired me was, what if every act of design and construction made the world a better place? Because clearly through that work, we don't. We are very wasteful. Sometimes we're ripping buildings down. Sometimes all kinds of things are happening. So we said, we're not necessarily able to make that decision because it really is going to take a community effort. There's going to be engineers and people at the building codes, and we were testing the limits of a lot of things possible. So we gathered over 60 community leaders, from engineers and folks working at the U, and contractors and architects, and folks from the building inspections and water department, and community leaders around transit and public schools, and the neighbors across the street who were vocal. So we brought all these folks together in a room, 3 separate days for 3 hours. They volunteered their time and loved it, and we learned a lot. And we started sort of by learning what the Living Building Challenge was. We moved on to what are the barriers and opportunities? How can we as a community get towards net zero water? How do we deal with some of those things our codes don't allow? How do we understand the relationship between the schools and people and transit and buildings? And we mixed people up at each table, and some of the engineers said, you know, we're always in the background. We've never sat with the public schools and listened to what they had to say. So it was a very exciting, robust process. We were all learning, studying, building models, understanding shadows and how they fall on neighboring buildings. And the end result was people were saying, this is possible. It's going to be really, really hard. And I'll continue the Living Building Challenge building on for another presentation, because what I'm going to say is what the people in the room said. Once we get this building right, it's really going to come down to behavior. So you really need to figure out the people living in the building, how they're going to be your partners, and understand this. Because if our goal is to create, just by nature of how the orientation and the massing and the envelope, a building that's 85% efficient from code. So that last 15% of energy use, it's mostly people. So some context of where we're doing this. Both the Living Building Challenge, which is the bigger building outlined here, and then the property just to the right is where a resident pilot is happening. It's up and running now. There are 4 corners in just downtown Minneapolis is right here. So the new building, and then where a resident pilot is happening. But it was a really an area in the community that was very blighted. It was vacant, etc. So for the last 10 years, we've been working with our partner called Hope Community, who's been engaged in the community, creating community leaders, etc. This corner's done, the Children's Village Center. The Jourdain was done this is 2003, 2005, the Wellstone in 2008. And then we hope to start construction on our living building next year. That area is called the South Quarter. So just again, some context, just downtown Minneapolis. This is what it sort of looked like before, and it was actually when it was kind of cleaned up. So this is the final site right there. That was the vision, which is mostly there today. And it's already created 120 homes plus some adjacent properties that are included in that number. So really we started talking about the people component. And so thanks to Enterprise and some other folks, we were able to put together a team to start working in the building across the street, which has demographics very close to who will be living in the new building. It's mixed income. There's 49 units in the Wellstone, 25% affordable, and then, I'm sorry, 25% market, affordable, and 75% affordable, 25% market rate, and there's about 7,000 square feet of commercial space on the first floor. That's a daycare. Opened in 2008, as I said, 142 total residents, 75 are children, and 2/3 of the group are from East Africa, mostly Somalia. The geeks, part for the geeks. The building square foot size, our energy intensity, our carbon intensity, and then how many gallons per bedroom per day, and I have some figures on that. So one of the things about this pilot program we wanted to be very rigorous about is data collection and taking the hard part about the social, working in kind of social settings. You get kind of anecdotal information and not quantitative, and so we wanted to find a way to quantify this as much as possible. This is the Wellstone already has stormwater management. It has solar thermal on the roof that helps heat anywhere from 30 to 50% of the water use. So we had to put a team together that could help us be scientists in this very social pilot. So besides us, our development partner, Hope Community, who does a lot of engagement and community organizing, really help work with the folks here. University of Minnesota, the department head for the housing studies program thankfully went on sabbatical and needed a project to work on during her year off. And so Becky Used was really a lead on this project, and she has done a lot of work with, educating people around lead-safe practices, et cetera. So she could really kind of cover how you do surveys, how you work with people, all those good things. The Center for Sustainable Building Research, again, helps to do our metrics and monitoring. And then a unique one is a group called Cummins Power Generation. They're a worldwide organization creating power generators. And they have a lot of engineers. They've been working with Aeon for years, volunteering, but they use a Six Sigma process to help reduce defects on the floors of their manufacturing facilities. And so they, as an organization, are taking some of their rigorous practices they use in manufacturing and applying them to social situations. So they were a help in helping us figure that piece out. Financial partners, Enterprise, the in-kind and the volunteer work from the folks on the team, Target Foundation, City of Minneapolis, Climate Change, Mississippi Watershed District, and Metro CERT. Some of that is funding the initial work we've been working on. Some will help carry it through. Really wanted to come up in the beginning with some goals for the project. And, I guess this is the phases, can't see that far. So we had a lot of different phases, and some of them were sequential and some were simultaneous. So we wanted to come up with goals and values. Again, benchmarks, metrics, what kind of information are we going to gather so we can show there's a real change or know what's working and know what isn't. Some of that included a resident survey. Really focused on cultivating resident leaders, because eventually we wanted the resident leaders to take this over so we didn't have to staff this and be the ones pointing the fingers and saying shut your water off and you brush your teeth. We installed some feedback meters so the residents could get some feedback, or some of them, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Tweaking the curriculum so that it's customized, creating informal workshops, formal workshops, did house calls. We found that nothing really kind of works, not one thing worked for everybody, so we needed sort of a menu of ways we could interact with people, so that's why we have the several things. So it got more complicated along the way. That wasn't in the, in the grant request. And then following up with a process called listening, or what Cummins call voice of the customer, where you really can interpret and categorize the data that you're getting from people and then be able to meet their needs better. And then evaluation, which we're sort of working on now. Values were important, so we always wanted to step back and saying, is this process doing these 5 things? Respectful for people, both residents and staff. People come from different places with the diversity and their cultures, and not all of these practices might fit anybody. Their intentions and motivations might be different. Clear communication. We had an agenda. We weren't going to pretend. We weren't trying to lower utility costs, so we wanted that to be right out there. And so we wanted to make sure that as part of this and a part of engaging people, they knew we also had a goal at the end. Building community capacity, making sure residents became leaders, they could do more for the community, they could, participate in different ways beyond this. Simplicity, like Jennifer said, manageable. How can we replicate it, bring it to scale, and then how can we maintain it in a cost-effective and practical way? And that it's data-driven. We know what impacts it has. Some general goals, we were just kind of picking these from the air. We didn't know what to expect. Reduce water by 15%, decrease energy by 10%, somehow diminish waste and increase recycling. And the recycling part was easy because it was at zero, because everyone would commingle, and then it was costing the property money, so it was eliminated. So we had to do some physical things to fix our confusing area. 2 minutes. Advance resident engagement. Future goals were around quality of life and alternative transportation. And I'm going to go whip through a whole bunch of slides, which was planned, not just because I have 2 minutes left, but it's about our benchmarking and our data. And it's just to give you some sense of what we were looking for so we can measure against that. So the EUI right now is about 45 kBTUs per square foot, which is pretty darn good, knowing code buildings that are at 100. So electricity summaries. We were looking at units, effects by the floor, which basically says electricity costs are highest on the first floor. We think that's an anomaly, but we're not quite sure. We looked at seasonality, July and August, air conditioning months. Number of residents. How do the number of residents affect? It generally increases with the number of residents, but not all the time. So again, behavior. Adults versus children typically increases with children, but again, not all the time if you look up at the right, the ups and downs. Teenagers, there you go. No relationship between electricity and cost per square foot. We have a lot of units at a little over 1,000 square feet. They're all over the map. Number of bedrooms generally increases, but again, behavior. Seasonality on the house meter. I'm going to whip through these. Differences in similar size units again on the house meter changes. Natural gas, some of the same things by floor, by season, by area of the unit, residents, adults versus children, similar size units. The point of all this is we're going to be able to tell. One of the things I want to show here, the Wellstone, even though it was planned at being about 41.7 gallons per person per day, it's nearly double and sometimes over double. So something crazy is going on. We think it's laundry machines and friends using in units. Higher water costs. University of Minnesota has a really great website where not only our project lies, but a bunch of other ones in the work they're doing. A couple things on the resident survey. We wanted to understand what residents were doing behaviorally, what their interests are, et cetera. So we'll be able to look into that in the future and compare it. Voice of the customer. What do you do with all this information, all this subjective, qualitative information? Cummins Power taught us how to do this KJ method. Once we got the voices, how do you summarize, characterize, and prioritize? It was a Japanese anthropologist who created that, so I encourage you to look that up. Our resident leaders. It's tough to develop people who are very energetic and ready to be the ones helping to push this, but that's the critical piece. In half the unit, we installed these energy meters so people can see what their energy use is real time. Curriculum development, etc. We found that the more formal workshops, people weren't ready to commit to sitting down for a half hour or an hour to talk about things, so we set up kiosks in the hallway where people could come by, 101 adults and 51 children, stop by for 5 minutes to learn a little bit on different subjects over time. That was a really important aha moment for us. The formal workshops, fewer people came to, so the quick stop-bys were much more effective. There's someone learning how to use their their thermostat. Lessons learned, ain't easy. So we still have a lot to work to move forward to figure out how to bring it to scale. How do we maintain these metrics? Nice that we have the University of Minnesota and Cummins Power engineers who are helping put this all together, but how does the nonprofit, sustain that? How do you maintain and sustain the behavior? And then how do you replicate that and bring it to scale? And so the two quotes that I'll leave you with that I think about is, a ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are for. So that's what we're here to do and to try to figure this stuff out. And this is one that I think is a little more personal to me. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. So thank you.